All right, so last time we were talking about George Washington. Today, we're going to talk about John Adams' administration. He'll be president next, and he will be our second POTUS. So, write this down, and then we'll move forward, folks. But today, we're talking about John Adams, the second president of the United States. POTUS, sir. Huh? Sure. Everyone ready? Okay, here we go. The first thing we should note here are the two essential questions that you should be able to answer at the very end of this unit, really. Is what contributions did Adam make to establishing a stronger national government? Is this something similar that we just did with Washington? Yeah. Sure, so this is a common trend you guys need to understand whenever talking about any president. What was their contribution? Did they make the government better or worse? And you have to ask this of every president. It's not just the few of them. Every president either made the government better than he left it, better than he found it, or worse than when he found it. Secondly, we have to explain whether or not political parties led to further American unity. So what do you think, folks? Did political parties make the country more unified or less unified? Likely less unified, because you're going to have more Democratic Republicans on one side and Federalists on the other. I mean, look at our country today, right? You have Republicans on one side, Democrats on the other, and they'll never meet in the middle to like shake hands and talk because they just believe that the other guy's just crazy. So you should be familiar with these two questions. The idea of how did the president make the government stronger, and also how did political parties lead to further unity. You can paraphrase this if you like. You don't have to write it word for word. But again, you should be familiar with these two common questions. And this actually doesn't apply just to this unit. This is actually for almost every single unit you should be familiar with. What did the president do, and how did political parties create less or more unity? Good? Ready? Moving on. So, in the election of 1796, there were three people that potentially could have run. First is John Adams. John Adams was a natural selection to run for office because what was John Adams' role in Washington's administration? He was the what? He was the vice president. So John Adams was vice president under President Washington. Make sense so far? So they're like, yeah, John Adams, you were vice president. That would make sense for you to run for president the following year. So John Adams was a natural contender. Alexander Hamilton was also a natural contender. Because why? Why would it be a good idea for Hamilton to run for office? Because he was Secretary of Treasury, but what else? Why might people vote for him? Brianna? George always agreed with him, definitely. And why might he know that he has a base that would vote for him? But why? Because he is what? He is the leader of the Federalists. And then, of course, who else is going to run for office? Jefferson. And naturally, they thought Jefferson should run because what? He was leader of the common man and the Democratic Republicans. I just put DR, folks. It's really the easiest way to abbreviate Democratic Republicans. Federalists are just Feds. Eventually, you can just call them Republicans because they don't call themselves Democratic Republicans because it takes too long. But, folks, of these three, who chooses not to run? Hamilton doesn't run for office. And the reason why Hamilton doesn't run for office is because he had way too many enemies. Do you think he pissed off some people? Oh, most definitely. With his policies, his demeanor, the way he spoke, he really turned a lot of people off. And so many people just decided, Hamilton, you might not be the best to run for office because we think people hate you. But do people like Jefferson? Yeah. So Jefferson, he was nominated by the Democratic Republican Party. The Democratic Republican said, Jefferson, you should run on our behalf. You will represent our party. He's like, yeah, I'll do that. I'm the leader. That makes sense. But the Federalists said, all right, we can't nominate Hamilton, so we're going to nominate who? Adams. So the Federalists nominated John Adams. Okay, so the Federalists nominate Adams. The Democratic Republicans, they nominate Jefferson. Good so far? Now, Adams wins 71 to 68. Does that mean only 139 people voted in the country? No, it means we're only counting what? The electoral vote. So in the election 71 to 68, Adams wins. Now, Jesus, you asked, how is it that Adams was able to defeat Jefferson? Honestly, it was a numbers game. Let's look. What are the states that voted for Jefferson? I mean, like, what kind of states are they? There's southern states, and most of these southern states, what kind of economy do they have? Farming, right? Did almost every southern state vote for Jefferson? Yes. Whereas look at these northern states. They all voted for Adams. And most of these northern states, do they have a lot of farms, like plantations? No, they have small farms and they have cities. So in terms of population, who do you think has a bigger population, the North or the South? The North does.
Are you getting the graph wrong? Or is it opposite of what the actual result was?
Hmm?
It says Adams had a higher percentage vote than Jefferson.
Yeah, Adams wins.
That's right.
So, yes, you're reading it correctly. In any case here, if you look at the numbers, Adams does win 71 to 68, but it's merely a numbers game. The population was bigger in the North, therefore Adams was going to win the election. And so John Adams becomes the second president of the United States, serving from 1796 to 1800. And looking at this right here, what do we already know about John Adams? He'll only win one term. He will be our first one-term president. Now, what do we know about John Adams? Well, first, he was the vice president of the U.S. under whom? George Washington. So that's one major reason why people voted for him. They're like, oh, well, you know, he's George's guy. He served under George Washington, so maybe he's the type of person that we would like to see running our country. Because George Washington did such a swell job. Why not John Adams? Also, John Adams was present during the Declaration of Independence. He helped write it with Thomas Jefferson. He was present during the First and Second Continental Congress. And was he integral in declaring our revolution against England? Yeah, he was a really important character in actually pushing us towards revolution. So John Adams is one of the most important founding fathers of our country. And then, of course, he was also present during the Boston Massacre. He was there when it happened. And he was also there to defend the rights of the British, which shows he's kind of this impartial, very neutral kind of guy. So yeah, John Adams, very good record here, very good resume in terms of being president. Unfortunately, he'll be one of the most hated presidents in our history, which is one of the most unfortunate things. It's sad, but oh well, that's life. So our second president, John Adams. Good so far? Here we go. Let's talk about the international incidences under Adams' administration first. Adams inherits a problem from George Washington. What's that problem that he inherits internationally? Let me put it this way. Let me make it clear. George Washington made a country very angry during his administration, and now John Adams is going to have to clean it up. He pissed off France. And why or how did George Washington upset France? He didn't what? He didn't honor the Franco-American alliance during the French Revolution or the French-European War. So the problems with the French. Here's what's happening. The French begin attacking American ships. The French have begun attacking American merchant ships. And these are just regular ships. They're not like military ships. American merchant ships are just regular trading ships. But the French are attacking us now. And why are the French attacking us? Because we didn't honor the alliance. They're mad at us and because we didn't honor the alliance. Well, they seize about 300 ships, guys. They seize about 300 American ships. And are we okay with this? But do we want to go to war? No. So what do you think John Adams is going to try to do? Make a treaty, negotiate. So that's exactly what we do. So John Adams decides to negotiate, and what he does is that he sends 3 diplomats. He sends 3 diplomats to France to negotiate a treaty. By the way, what is a diplomat? Jesus? It's a representative from the country, okay? So if I sent you guys to Workman to, like, I don't know, like sign a treaty with Workman over football and then like the stadium, you guys would be LP diplomats. Make sense to everyone? If you guys go and play sports at another school, you guys are diplomats of the school because you guys are representing us wherever you guys go. Anyway, we send these 3 diplomats to France to negotiate a treaty. And typically we hope good things would come out of it, right? Instead, this sending of Americans, this envoy of Americans, this ends up becoming a scandal. And the scandal becomes known as the XYZ affair. Here's what happens. We send the 3 people and it becomes the XYZ affair. And here's why. When the Americans arrived in France to negotiate, 3 men that we call X, Y, and Z said that in order to negotiate, we had to pay a bribe. So pretty much they demanded a bribe before the Americans could negotiate with France. They demanded a bribe in order to negotiate with France. So 3 men that we called X, Y, and Z, we didn't publish their real names, so it's called the XYZ affair. They demanded a bribe from America in order to negotiate. Now, this was a huge insult to America because they were demanding over $250,000 just to negotiate. And by the way, folks, giving him that money didn't mean we were going to get what we wanted in the treaty. No, it was just to negotiate. That's like if you're driving to McDonald's and you have to pay to get into the drive-thru, and once you get into the drive-thru, like, oh yeah, we ran out of food. But I just paid $10 to get into the drive-thru. I'm like, yeah, I know. Or like you pay to like $80 to get into Disneyland, and once you get in, you have to pay to like ride all the rides when all the rides are broken. That's not okay. And so the Americans were frustrated because would they have ever dared to demand this kind of money from England or Spain or Russia? So clearly, was this an insult to the American people? They saw this as a scandal. They said, what? You would never demand this kind of money from England or France, which was kind of true. Guys, paying bribes was pretty common in Europe. But you might pay like a $10,000 bribe, a $50,000 bribe. But $250,000, that was considered an insult. So America refused. They said, no, we were not going to pay that bribe. And instead, America said, or rather, and this becomes the quasi-war. Let's put it this way. Because America refuses to pay that bribe, it sets off what is known as the quasi-war. I'll explain what quasi means. But because America refuses to pay the bribe, it begins what is known as the quasi-war. Now, the word quasi means like kind of. So like, let's say you were doing really well in this class. So I said, you know, Emily, why don't you teach my class every Friday because you're doing so well so far. You just really get the content. So are you really a teacher? But you're kind of a teacher. You're like a quasi-teacher. Like if I started taking college classes again, I took like 1 class every week at the university. Would I be a full-time college student? Sort of. I would be a quasi-student. Does that make sense? It's a kind of war. And the reason why this is called a quasi-war is because this was an unofficial or undeclared war with France. So it's an unofficial or undeclared war with France. It's an unofficial or undeclared war with France. So we're fighting with them, but have we officially declared war? No. And are you supposed to if you're declaring war? If you're fighting a war, do you have to declare it? Yes, but here we are fighting and have yet to declare a war. And so it's an unofficial war that we're fighting with France. That way we don't have to sign a peace treaty or whatever else, but it's an unofficial war going on. And the reason why we did this is, again, America's honor was insulted. So we told France, millions for defense, but not 1 cent for tribute. What do you think that means when we say millions for defense, but not 1 cent for tribute? Rosa? The bribe? What are they saying?
So it's saying, like, I get it, but I just know how to explain it.
Who can explain this? Millions for defense, but not 1 cent for tribute. Jerry?
They spend our money for themselves to protect themselves, so they don't want to pay other people for like fees and taxes.
Yeah, like we refuse to pay bribes. So I won't give you a single penny. I'd rather spend millions of dollars to defend myself than give you a damn thing. That's pretty much what they're saying, right? So they said, France, you insulted us. You're getting nothing from us. Even if all you asked was for a penny to sign that treaty, no. We will pay millions of dollars to protect ourselves, but we're giving you nothing. Nothing. And so, folks, what we credit John Adams for doing is because of this and the quasi-war, John Adams creates the U.S. Navy Department. So John Adams is credited for creating the U.S. Navy, or the U.S. Navy Department, because do we now need a Navy to protect our ships? Yes, and so now you have this unofficial war, and we are protecting ourselves. You also have him create the U.S. Marine Corps, so the U.S. Marines are also established for the first time to defend against the French in case they ever attack. Good so far? Okay. This battle lasts for 2 years, but is this something that John Adams wants? No, and didn't George Washington warn against these kinds of wars and whatever else, Neutrality Proclamation? He doesn't like this. He doesn't want to cost, America even more money. So he tries to finally negotiate an alliance, or rather a treaty with France. And in 1800, he signs the Convention of 1800, which is just a treaty. But he signs the Convention of 1800 in 1800, in case you didn't know when it was. Here's what it says. First off, this is a treaty that John Adams signs with whom from France? Napoleon. So Napoleon has finally taken over France. And John Adams says, hey, Napoleon, I would like to end this war. And Napoleon's like, oh, yeah, me too. So they sign a treaty. And the treaty says 2 things. Number 1, it ends the quasi-war. Good, easy, simple. It ends the quasi-war. It helps them, recognize each other. 2, it voided the Franco-American alliance. Which means what? They got rid of it, right? Because now does America have to help out France anymore? No. And vice versa. So we got rid of the Franco-American alliance, and Napoleon says, you don't have to help us anymore. What is our problem? We are okay. So we void the Franco-American alliance, and things are pretty good for America now. Why might Napoleon, I know why America wants to end this war, because they don't have the money for it. Why might Napoleon want to stop fighting America? Jesus?
Because of his campaign for Europe.
Yeah, he's fighting a war with Europe. If he's fighting east towards Europe, does he want to worry about America on his back? No. So he says, I ignore that. The other thing is Napoleon wants to create an American empire. He wants to expand the French empire and have land holdings in North America. And because America is the most important or powerful country in the North American continent, he feels he has to be best friends with America in order to build a French empire. Anyway, good there? So, ultimately, did John Adams help us here? Prevented further war. It did break out a little bit. It wasn't really his fault, but okay. Good with international. Let's talk about domestic. Domestic. Domestic conflicts are conflicts that happen where? in the country, at home, in America. That's a domestic conflict. An international conflict is a conflict that happens where? Foreign, outside the country, has to do with other countries. Domestic can be political, economic, social, right? Just want to make sure that's clear with everyone. Everyone good? Let's go. So, first off, we should know is that John Adams had no friends. It's very sad. Here's why. John Adams used to be best friends with Thomas Jefferson. I mean, they went through a lot together, right? They were at the Continental Congress together. They wrote the Declaration of Independence together. They were in George Washington's administration together. I mean, these guys were like the best of friends. The problem was when Hamilton and Jefferson stopped, when they created those political parties, did Adams have to choose? Which party are you going to be in, Adams? Are you going to choose to be a Federalist, or are you going to choose to be a Republican? And Adams, wanting to honor the ideas and recommendations of George Washington, said what? Neither. I choose to be neither. And Jefferson said, well, fine. Either you believe in something or you believe in nothing, and you clearly don't believe in the things that I believe in, so sorry. You and I can't be friends. Also, I should make very clear, I forgot to mention this earlier, Thomas Jefferson was his vice president. The reason why, folks, is that early on in the Constitution, before it was amended, the way elections worked was that first place became president and second place became vice president. That's the way elections used to work. And that made sense back then because when we first created the Constitution, what did not exist? Political parties. And so it was okay. But now that we have political parties, does that make that system a little bit more difficult? Now you have Adams, who's considered to be a Federalist, or Jefferson thinks he's a Federalist, but he doesn't see himself as a Federalist. But Jefferson says, you're a Federalist because you support Hamilton, so you must be a Federalist. But he's not, so he has a Democratic Republican for a vice president. Imagine how weird would that be today if in the election of 2012, Obama wins president and Mitt Romney became vice president. And if that was the situation, folks, what would the vice president always hope to happen? That the president would die somehow, right? And that would be a major concern, which is why we don't have that system anymore, because once we realized that political parties were going to be an issue, we passed the 12th Amendment to make sure that this would not happen again. So now vice president and president are elected together, because before it would be a really crazy system. So Jefferson doesn't like Adams. Everyone get that so far? And the reason why he doesn't like Adams is that even though Adams is not openly, or he doesn't call himself a Federalist, he supports Hamilton's economic policies. He supports Hamilton's economic policies because who else supported Hamilton's economic policies? George Washington. And does John Adams respect George Washington? A lot. He says Hamilton must have had some good ideas, and he actually does agree with Hamilton's policies. Like, you know what? In the long term, this will be what is best for the country. But here's the problem. Hamilton hates Adams. Hates him. He thinks he's a fake. He thinks that Adams is not a true Federalist. He thinks he's a weak president. So guess who also doesn't like Adams? Hamilton. So the leader of the Democratic Republicans, they don't like Adams. And the leader of the Federalists, who he's not a part of, but everyone thinks he's a part of, also doesn't like him. He's the man with no friends. His own party, which he doesn't believe he's a part of, but he has to be a part of, because he's definitely not a Democratic Republican, hates him. Guys, when Hamilton was in Adams' cabinet, he tried to turn the party against Adams. He actually tried to control Adams. Like, you do this, and I'm going to make my advisors all tell you this. He tried to manipulate Adams. And when Adams finally called him out on it, Hamilton quit. He said, fine, I won't be your advisor anymore. And he quit the cabinet. So yeah, that's going on. Anyway, so the man with no friends. Despite not being very friendly with the Federalists, or Federalists not liking him, he is still technically a Federalist president. And so the Federalists decide to pass a law to hurt the Democratic Republican Party, because really this is a fight over political parties now, right? So here's what happens. In 1796, the Federalists passed a law called the Alien and Sedition Acts. This was a law passed by the Federalists, and the purpose of the Alien and Sedition Acts was to weaken the Democratic Republican Party. The purpose of this was to weaken the Democratic Republican Party. Again, the purpose of this was to weaken the Democratic Republican Party. So here's what it did. It's actually broken up into multiple sections. But the Alien Act, what that did was that it allowed the president to deport dangerous immigrants. The Alien Act allowed the president to deport dangerous immigrants. So again, the Alien and Sedition Acts passed by the Federalists to weaken the Republicans. The first part, the Alien Act, said that the president could deport dangerous immigrants. Now, dangerous is in quotations because that's kind of up for interpretation. Dangerous immigrants. But why might the Federalists believe that deporting immigrants would help them to weaken the Democratic Republican Party? Jesus? That's precisely right. Most immigrants that come to this country are of what class? Rich or common? Common. And common people, are they likely going to vote for the Federalists or the Democratic Republicans? Democratic Republicans. So their idea was that by deporting dangerous immigrants, it would allow them to prevent immigrants from becoming voters. The idea was to prevent them from becoming voters. That was the whole point. If we can get rid of them, they won't vote for Jefferson's party, and will we continue to be in power? Because are there a lot of immigrants coming into the country? Yeah. So they're trying to prevent that as best as possible. Yes? That's the thing. Dangerous is up to them. Like, oh, you're dangerous because I don't know you. You're poor and you might be a rebel. So I'm going to deport you. So you see how it's such a vague term? It's like, you don't have to be a murderer. You're dangerous because, well, you're going to vote for the other guy. But I can't say that openly. So you're dangerous because you might be a communist. So you're gone. But really, why am I deporting you? Because you're going to vote for Jefferson. Does that make sense to everyone? What we really mean by dangerous is you're going to be a Democratic Republican. But that is supposed to weaken the Democratic Republican Party because no one will vote for them anymore. By the way, is this very similar to today? The Republican Party is trying to do something very similar because there's a fear that if they naturalize or give the 11 million illegal immigrants in this country citizenship or path to citizenship, because most of them are the common man, they'll likely vote for which party? The Democratic Party. So there's a fear by many Republicans that creating amnesty or giving a path to citizenship for immigrants is going to create this huge group of like 11 million people to vote Democrat, which they think will make them lose all the elections. So which is why there's huge debate about whether or not to do it. The other part, though, is the Sedition Act. And what the Sedition Act said was that you couldn't say anything bad about the government. You couldn't say anything bad about the government. By the way, who's currently running the government at this point in time? Like, which party was in charge? The Federalists were in charge. And so they said you can't say anything bad about the government. Why would that weaken the Democratic Republican Party? What wouldn't they be able to do? Yeah, they wouldn't be able to criticize Federalist policies. And so this weakens the Democratic Party because it prevented them from criticizing Federalist policies. If I'm not in the government and you guys pass, let's say, the Alien Sedition, I think, that's a bad law. Oh, you can't say that. The Sedition Act says you can't say anything bad about the government. You're going to jail. By the way, folks, jail time, 6 months or $5,000. Back then, $5,000. That's a lot of money back then. That's like $5,000. What do I look like? A very rich person? Today, that's a lot of money. So, the whole purpose was to weaken the Democratic Republican Party. Does that make sense to everyone so far? By Alien Act, how did it weaken them? It took away what? Yeah, future voters, right? It eliminated future voters. By passing the Sedition Act, how did it weaken the Democratic Party? They couldn't criticize. Pretty much, folks, it took away what two rights? It eliminated freedom of speech and press. So you should note that as well. It eliminated freedom of speech and press because they couldn't criticize the government. Are the Democratic Republicans okay with this? No, they're clearly upset. So in response, they say this is stupid, and they write the Virginia and Kentucky resolutions. Last thing we're going to do today. The Virginia and Kentucky resolutions, folks, said that if the federal government would not eliminate laws that protected people's rights, if the federal government wouldn't eliminate laws that protected people's, what am I saying? If the federal government wouldn't eliminate laws to protect people's rights, if the federal government wouldn't, eliminate laws to protect people's rights, then the states had the power of nullification. Then the states had the power of nullification. Spelled up here. If the federal government wouldn't eliminate laws to protect people's rights, then the states would have the power of nullification. And what nullification means is that if the states believe that a law is bad, they can nullify it. What does that mean to nullify? Reject. Pretty much what it means is states could declare laws to be unconstitutional. It said states can declare laws to be unconstitutional if the federal government is not going to protect our rights. Because were the Alien and Sedition Acts taking away our rights? And was the federal government doing anything about it? So I said, fine, if you're not going to protect us, then the states will protect us. And the states have this power called nullification. And they said, because the states have the power of nullification, guys, if states can nullify or declare federal laws unconstitutional, what is Jefferson suggesting about states and the federal government? States have more power than the federal government. When you're wrong, who gets to tell you that you're wrong? The states do. And if the states have the final say, then the federal government is lower than the states. Does that make sense to everyone? By saying that the states have the final say, we are now up top. So the federal government is here. If they make something bad, the states say, no, you can't do that. It's the opposite of the Judiciary Act. Because the federal government said, who had the final say in terms of the constitutionality of laws? The Supreme Court. Federal government, the Supreme Court. States said no. It's up to the states. And here's why he believed that. Last thing you should know today, folks, is something called compact theory. Jefferson said that there was something called compact theory that existed. And what compact theory said was that the federal government was created by who? Who created the federal government, folks? The states. Remember, folks, weren't the states 13 independent countries before the federal government? And did we agree to give up our powers to this federal government? With the expectation that what? They would protect us. So if we gave up our powers to the federal government to protect us, what happens if they don't protect us? We can take that power back. That's the compact theory. Because we created the federal government and we gave up our powers, we have the power to take it back. That's compact theory. Is this kind of problematic? That states can declare federal laws to be unconstitutional? Because what if the federal law passed a law that said, all right, everyone is allowed to have like gay marriage now? Would some states agree? And would some states disagree? So is there any point in passing a federal law? What would something like this do to our country? Wouldn't it break apart again? Because what's the point of having a federal government if everything that you say has to be approved by the individual states each time? It's almost like you have no power. And so the concern here is that compact theory might actually divide our government even further. Folks, this is an issue over political parties, right? This is Democrats versus Federalists, or Republicans versus Federalists. Is this making our country more or less united? Less united. So Jefferson, or rather Hamilton will lose, Adams will lose in the election of 1800. Why do you think he lost?
No friends.
Well, no friends, but also because he passed the Alien and Sedition Acts.
Oh, he passed it.
Well, he had to sign them. He didn't want to pass them, but Hamilton made them. So in any case, Adams will lose because of the Alien and Sedition Acts in the following election. And we'll get to that later. Yes?
So like back then, anyone could write like on paper and then people would have to go by it?
No, I mean, like, this didn't actually happen. So one thing to make clear is that this is an idea, but nothing actually came out of it. Like, it was an idea that he presented, but it didn't become law. But it was introduced. So folks, your only homework, which should take you like 3 minutes, is to just create an Adams presidential chart in your notes. So you have political, economic, social, international. Okay, and just fill that into your notes. Do it. It's very easy. Just like George Washington's. You just complete this chart in your notes. That's all you have to do. Otherwise, have a wonderful weekend, folks. You may go when the bell rings. I'll see you guys on Monday.